The stagecoach lurched violently as it hit another frozen rut, throwing Margaret Sullivan against the worn leather seat. She clutched her worn carpetbag tighter, feeling the sharp corners of her teaching certificate and the small daguerreotype of her late husband pressing through the fabric. At 45, she was starting over, leaving the familiar streets of Boston for a teaching position in Arizona territory that promised a modest salary and a chance to escape the suffocating pity of well-meaning relatives. "Storm's coming," muttered the driver, his voice barely audible over the groaning wheels and the rising wind. "Ain't natural. Snow this far south this time of year." Margaret pulled her woolen cloak tighter around her shoulders. The other passengers, a whiskey drummer named Jake Hutchins with yellowed teeth and wandering eyes, and a silent man in a dusty black coat who kept his hat pulled low, shifted uneasily. She'd noticed how Jake's gaze lingered on her carpetbag and the modest gold wedding band she still wore. Men like him saw a lone woman traveler as easy prey, though she kept her father's derringer hidden in her boot. The sky had turned an ominous gray-green, heavy with unshed snow. The mesquite and sage that dotted the landscape bent before the wind like supplicants at prayer. Margaret had traveled this route only in her imagination, poring over maps and letters from the school board in Pine Ridge. They'd promised her a small but adequate cottage and 23 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old. "How much further to the next station?" she asked, trying to keep the worry from her voice. "About 10 miles, the driver called back. "But we ain't gonna make it, not in this." As if his words had summoned it, the snow began, not the gentle flakes of Boston winters, but hard, driving pellets that stung exposed skin and turned the world white within minutes. The horses whinnied in distress, their breath forming clouds in the suddenly frigid air. That's when she heard it, a whistle that didn't belong to the wind. The first shot splintered the wood near her head. Margaret dropped to the floor instinctively, her heart hammering. Through the window, she glimpsed masked riders emerging from behind a cluster of boulders, their rifles raised. "Stand and deliver." The lead rider's voice was muffled by his bandana, but the menace was clear. The driver pulled hard on the reins, bringing the coach to a sliding stop. Margaret heard him curse before a gunshot silenced him. His body hit the ground with a dull thud that made her stomach turn. The coach door was yanked open. Jake Hutchins was already fumbling for his wallet, his face pale beneath his whiskers. The silent man slowly raised his hands, revealing a sheriff's badge that caught the dim light. "Well, well," laughed one of the bandits. A lean man with cold blue eyes visible above his mask. "A lawman. Boys, looks like we got ourselves a bonus." They dragged the sheriff out first. Margaret heard a struggle, a sickening crack, then silence. Jake was next, blubbering promises of hidden cash if they'd spare his life. The bandits took his money, his watch, even his boots, before pistol whipping him unconscious. Then those cold blue eyes turned to her. "Ma'am," the leader said with mock courtesy, "step on out here." Margaret's hands shook as she climbed down from the coach. The snow was already ankle-deep, seeping through her button-up boots. 5 men surrounded her, their faces hidden but their intentions clear in their postures. "Please," she said, hating how her voice quavered. "I'm just a schoolteacher. I have very little—" "We'll be the judge of that." The leader gestured to one of his men. "Check her bag." Rough hands tore the carpetbag from her grasp. They scattered her few possessions in the snow, her teaching certificate, the daguerreotype, her mother's Bible, the small leather pouch containing her life savings of $43. "Is this all?" The leader sounded disgusted. "Barely worth the bullets we spent." "Wait," said another bandit, younger, with a cruel twist to his mouth. "Check her clothes. Widow woman like this probably got things sewn into her corset." Margaret's blood turned to ice. "No, please!" But they were already upon her. Hands grabbed at her cloak, ripping it away. Her thick woolen dress came next, torn at the seams despite her struggles. They found the small gold locket hidden in her bodice, her mother's last gift, and ripped it free, leaving a red welt on her chest. The boots, too, someone said. Might be hiding something. They forced her to sit in the snow while they yanked off her boots, finding the derringer and laughing at it. Her thick stockings provided little protection against the cold that immediately began gnawing at her feet. "Please," Margaret begged through chattering teeth, dressed now only in her thin chemise and petticoat. "You'll kill me leaving me like this." The leader studied her for a long moment. She could see him weighing her life against whatever twisted code these men lived by. Finally, he shrugged. "Way I see it, ma'am, you got two choices. Die quick from a bullet, or take your chances with the storm. What'll it be?" Margaret lifted her chin, finding a reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed. "I'll take my chances." He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Thought you might. Boston ladies got spine. I'll give you that." He swung up onto his horse. "Boys, let's ride. Take the horses and anything worth selling." They left her there, kneeling in the snow beside the murdered driver and the unconscious forms of her fellow passengers. The wind howled around her, driving snow into every exposed inch of skin. Her carpetbag lay scattered, her possessions already disappearing under white drifts. Margaret forced herself to stand. Her feet were already numb, making each step treacherous. She tried to think clearly through the cold that was rapidly clouding her mind. The road! She had to follow the road. The station was 10 miles ahead, an impossible distance in her condition. But what choice did she have? She stumbled forward, arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt to preserve warmth. The snow fell heavier now, erasing the road, the landmarks, everything but white and cold and the certainty of death. Behind her, the stagecoach disappeared into the storm, becoming just another ghost story of the territories. Margaret Sullivan, who had come west seeking a new life, found herself walking into what seemed certain to be her last sunset, though the sun itself was invisible behind the relentless curtain of snow. Her bare feet left bloody prints that the wind erased within seconds. Still, she walked on, driven by the same stubborn will that had carried her from Boston to this godless wilderness. She would not give those men the satisfaction of finding her corpse by the coach. She would walk until she couldn't, and then she would crawl. And then, she supposed, she would finally join her husband in whatever came after. The storm swallowed her whole. This proper Boston widow stripped of everything but her determination to survive one more step, one more breath, one more heartbeat in the merciless embrace of the frontier winter. The cold was a living thing, a beast with 1,000 teeth that gnawed at Margaret's exposed flesh. Her feet had long since ceased to feel like feet. They were merely frozen clubs that she dragged through the deepening snow. Each step required an act of will that grew harder to summon. How long had she been walking? Minutes? Hours? Time had lost all meaning in this white void where sky and earth merged into one endless, howling emptiness. Her thin chemise, soaked through with snow, clung to her skin like a shroud of ice. The delicate lace at the collar, which she had mended so carefully just last week in her Boston boarding house, now cut into her throat with each labored breath. She fell for the first time when her frozen foot caught on something buried in the snow. A rock, perhaps, or a frozen branch. The impact drove the air from her lungs, and for a moment she lay there, face pressed into the snow, tasting its metallic cold. The temptation to remain there was overwhelming. Just close her eyes and let the snow become her blanket, her burial shroud. "No." The word came out as barely a whisper, but she forced herself to hands and knees. Samuel wouldn't have wanted this. Her husband, dead these 3 years from consumption, had always admired her strength. "My marble Madonna," he'd called her, touching her graying hair with gentle fingers during his final days. "Carved from New England granite, you are." The memory gave her enough strength to stand, though her legs trembled like a newborn colt's. She pressed on, no longer following any road. It had vanished beneath the drifts, but simply moving away from where she'd been, toward where she hoped salvation might lie. Her mind began to wander, slipping between past and present like a fish through ice-cold water. She was back in Boston, standing before her students at the Beacon Hill School for Young Ladies. Proper posture. Girls, she heard herself saying. A lady's bearing speaks before her voice. The absurdity of it made her laugh, a cracked sound that the wind snatched away. Here she was, stumbling through a blizzard in her undergarments, worried about posture. The second fall came harder. Her knees buckled without warning, and she pitched forward into a drift that swallowed her to the waist. This time, getting up required scraping together every fragment of will she possessed. Her hands, blue-white with cold, could barely push against the snow. The lace cuffs of her chemise had frozen solid, tiny ice crystals forming delicate patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't killing her. She thought of her sister Catherine, safe in her brownstone with her merchant husband and 3 plump children. Catherine had begged her not to go west. "It's no place for a woman alone," she'd said, clutching Margaret's hands at the train station. "Especially not a woman of your mature years." Mature years, 45. Too old to remarry, according to Boston society. Too young to sit in parlors doing needlework until death claimed her. The teaching position had seemed like salvation, a chance to matter again, to shape young minds in a place where her past didn't define her. Now, as she forced herself upright once more, she wondered if Catherine hadn't been right after all. Her hair, once pinned in a proper bun, now hung in frozen ropes around her face. She could feel ice forming on her eyelashes, weighing them down. Each blink required effort. The world had narrowed to the next step, the next breath, the next heartbeat that seemed to echo too loudly in her chest. She began to see things in the swirling snow. Samuel stood beside a boulder, wearing his best Sunday suit, beckoning her forward. Her mother appeared briefly, young again, calling her to supper. These visions should have frightened her, but instead they seemed like company on her final journey. The shivering had stopped. Some distant part of her mind, the part that had read medical texts to better understand Samuel's illness, knew this was a bad sign, the body's final surrender, when it no longer had energy to fight the cold. She felt almost warm now, a dangerous, seductive warmth that made her want to remove her chemise, to lie down in the soft snow and sleep. She fell a third time, and this time she knew she wouldn't get up. Her legs simply refused to obey. She managed to drag herself a few feet, fingers clawing at the snow, before collapsing against what might have been a rock or a frozen log. The wind had died down momentarily, and in the relative quiet, she could hear her own ragged breathing. "Father," she whispered, the prayer coming unbidden to lips that could barely form words. "Into thy hands," but she couldn't remember the rest. Her mind, that tool she had prided herself on, was failing like everything else. She thought of the children she would never teach. 23 young souls waiting for a teacher who would never arrive. Would they wonder what happened to Mrs. Sullivan from Boston? Would anyone mourn her? Or would she simply disappear into the vast indifference of the frontier? Another casualty of the Western dream? The snow began to cover her, gentle now, almost tender. She could no longer feel her body at all. She existed only as a spark of consciousness flickering in the white darkness, growing dimmer with each passing moment. That's when she saw him. At first, she thought it was another vision, death coming to claim her in a form her failing mind could accept. A massive shape emerged from the curtain of snow, moving with a grace that seemed impossible for something so large. As it drew closer, she could make out details through her ice-crusted lashes. A figure wrapped in dark furs, tall as a giant from a fairy tale, moving through the storm as if it were a summer day. The figure stopped a few feet away, and Margaret found herself looking up at a face that seemed carved from dark stone, high cheekbones, a prominent nose, eyes black as winter nights, an Apache warrior. She realized with what little cognition remained. He wore a massive cloak of what looked like bear fur. snow gathering on his broad shoulders like epaulets. For a long moment, they regarded each other, the dying white woman and the Apache giant. Margaret waited for the final blow, for him to finish what the storm had started. She'd heard stories of what Indians did to white women, whispered tales in Boston parlors that had made her clutch her teacup tighter. Instead, he knelt beside her, moving with surprising gentleness for such a large man. His face, weathered by wind and sun, showed something she didn't expect: concern, perhaps even compassion. He said something in a language she didn't understand, his voice deep as distant thunder. Then, in accented but clear English, "You die here, white woman." It wasn't a question. Margaret tried to respond, but her voice emerged as barely a croak. "Please." She wasn't even sure what she was asking for. A quick death? Salvation? She was beyond caring. The Apache studied her for another moment, then made his decision. With movements both swift and careful, he unfastened his great fur cloak and wrapped it around her frozen form. The sudden warmth was so intense it hurt, making her gasp. The fur smelled of smoke and pine and something wild she couldn't name. Before she could process what was happening, he had lifted her into his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing. Margaret's head lolled against his chest, and she felt the steady rhythm of his heartbeat through the leather shirt he wore beneath the furs. As consciousness finally slipped away, her last coherent thought was wonder at the strangeness of it all. She had come west expecting to teach children, only to die in a blizzard. She had expected death to be cold and lonely, only to find warmth in the arms of a man her people called savage. The storm raged on, but Margaret Sullivan knew no more. She had stepped off the precipice between life and death, and whether she would land on one side or the other remained to be seen. All she knew was warmth, darkness, and the steady stride of the giant who carried her into the white unknown. Warmth. That was the first sensation that penetrated the darkness. Not the false warmth that preceded death, but real heat that seeped into frozen bones and sparked life back into numbed flesh. Margaret's eyes fluttered open to find herself staring at a stone ceiling painted orange by firelight. She lay on a bed of pine boughs covered with soft furs, more luxurious than anything in her Boston home, the great bear cloak still wrapped around her. But beneath it, she realized with a start, her frozen chemise had been replaced with a soft doe-skin dress. Someone had changed her clothes while she was unconscious, had seen her in her most vulnerable state. Panic flared, but before she could rise, a deep voice spoke from the shadows. "You wake! Good!" The Apache sat cross-legged by the fire, feeding it with practiced movements. In the firelight, she could see him more clearly than during their encounter in the storm. He was perhaps 50 years old, though it was hard to tell. His face bore the timeless quality of carved stone, marked by years but not diminished by them. His hair, black, shot through with silver, was tied back with a leather cord. He wore simple clothing, leather leggings, a cotton shirt, and a vest decorated with intricate beadwork. "Where?" Margaret's voice came out as a croak. "Safe place. Cave. Storm still angry outside." He gestured toward the entrance, where she could hear wind howling past what looked like a heavy buffalo hide serving as a door. She tried to sit up, clutching the cloak around her. "My clothes!" "Wet clothes kill you. Had to change." His tone was matter-of-fact, but he kept his eyes on the fire, perhaps sensing her discomfort. "I am father to daughters once. Know how to respect woman." Once, the word hung in the air like smoke. He rose. She hadn't realized quite how tall he was, well over 6 feet, and moved to a collection of items near the fire. He returned with a wooden cup filled with steaming liquid. "Drink. Medicine tea. Make blood warm again." Margaret accepted the cup with trembling hands. The tea was bitter, tasting of bark and herbs she couldn't identify, but warmth spread through her chest with each sip. As she drank, she studied her surroundings. The cave was larger than she'd first thought, extending back into darkness. Supplies were stacked neatly along one wall. Parfleches, water gourds, bundles of dried plants. This wasn't a temporary shelter. Someone lived here. "I should thank you," she said finally. "You saved my life." He shrugged, a gesture that seemed too modern for his ancient face. "Sea woman dying in snow. What kind of man walks past? Even white woman deserves better death than freezing." "My name is Margaret Sullivan." He nodded slowly. "I am called many things. Soldiers call me Joseph. My people call me Kichio Hanzi, means brave eagle in your tongue." "Joseph," she tested the name, finding it strange that this imposing Apache warrior bore such a common Christian name. "Mission name," he explained, catching her confusion. "Priests give it when young, before I know better." A bitter smile touched his lips. Margaret finished the tea, already feeling stronger. How long have I been here?" "Sun sets once since I bring you. You sleep like dead. Sometimes cry out, speak of Samuel." Heat flooded her cheeks. "My husband, he passed 3 years ago." Joseph nodded, but said nothing. Returning to tend the fire, Margaret watched him work, noting the economy of his movements, the quiet competence. Everything about him spoke of self-sufficiency, of a man who needed no one and nothing beyond what the land provided. "Why do you live here alone?" she asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. "Forgive me, that was rude." "No." He settled back into his cross-legged position. "Is fair question. You trust life to stranger. Should know who he is." He was quiet for a long moment, eyes lost in the flames. "Had wife, beautiful woman, daughter of chief, had 2 daughters, bright like morning stars. Had son, strong boy who loved horses." The past tense told the story before he continued. 8 winters ago, soldiers come to our camp, say we must move to agency land. We peaceful people, plant corn, raise horses, but soldiers want our valley for white settlers. We say we go peaceful, pack our things, but young warriors proud, make angry words, soldiers nervous. 1 shot fired, nobody knows who shoots first. He picked up a stick, broke it methodically into smaller pieces. "When done, my family sleep forever. Many families sleep forever. I fight, kill 3 soldiers before they shoot me here." He touched his side. "Leave me for dead, but I no die. Crawl away, hide, heal. Now live here. No more Joseph the mission Indian. No more brave eagle the warrior. Just man waiting for his time." Margaret felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm so sorry." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw depths of pain that matched her own. "You know loss too. See it in your eyes when you sleep. Call for Samuel like I call for my Ayana." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. "Finally," Margaret asked, "the men who robbed me, do you know them?" Joseph's face hardened. "Know of them. Led by a man called Dutch Garrett. They raid stages, sometimes kill. Law does nothing because they pay right people. Also because they blame Apache when can..." He spat into the fire. "Easy to blame dead Indians for white man crimes." Margaret shuddered, remembering those cold blue eyes above the bandana. "They took everything. My money, my mother's Bible, even..." She touched her throat where the locket had been ripped away. "Things can be replaced. Life cannot." Joseph stood again, moved to his supplies, and returned with more tea and something wrapped in leather. "Eat dried meat and mesquite cakes. Not white woman food, but gives strength." The dried meat was tough but flavorful, the mesquite cakes sweet and filling. As she ate, Margaret marveled at the strangeness of her situation. 2 days ago, she had been a proper Boston widow heading to a respectable teaching position. Now she sat in a cave, wearing Indian dress, sharing a meal with an Apache warrior who had every reason to hate her kind. "Your dress," she said, touching the soft doe skin. "I'll return it when..." "Was my daughter's." His voice was soft. She tall like you. Would be woman of 25 winters now. Dress does no good sitting in bundle. Better it keep you warm. Margaret didn't know what to say to such generosity, especially given its source. The storm, she managed finally. How long will it last? Maybe 1 day, maybe 3. This storm not natural. Comes too early, too hard, land confused, seasons mixed up. He studied her. You strong enough, I take you to town when storm stops. Pine Ridge 2 days walk. Pine Ridge, where her teaching position waited, where her new life was supposed to begin. It seemed like a dream now, insubstantial as smoke. What will people say? She wondered aloud. When they learn an Apache saved me? Joseph's laugh was short and humorless. They say nothing to me. I ghost to them, trade furs sometimes, fix horses, then disappear. They happy to not see me as long as I useful. He paused. They maybe not believe you. Say you sun-touched from cold. Or maybe they believe and think worse things. Margaret knew what he meant. A white woman alone with an Indian man, wearing Indian clothes. The conclusions people would draw were inevitable. Her reputation, so carefully guarded all these years, would be destroyed. I don't care, she said, surprising herself with the vehemence. Let them think what they want. I know the truth. You saved my life when you could have let me die. You've shown me more kindness and respect than those civilized men who robbed me. Joseph studied her for a long moment. You different from other white women. They look at me, see only savage. You look and see man. Perhaps because I've learned that the real savages often wear familiar faces. Margaret replied, thinking of Dutch Garrett's cold blue eyes. Outside, the wind howled its fury. But inside the cave, warmed by fire and unexpected companionship, 2 wounded souls found a moment of peace. They talked more as the night deepened, careful conversations that skirted around deeper hurts while acknowledging their presence. Joseph taught her a few words in Apache: fire, water, thank you. Margaret told him about her students in Boston, making him smile with stories of their innocent mischief. When exhaustion finally claimed her again, Margaret lay back on the bed of furs, still wrapped in the great bear cloak. As sleep took her, she heard Joseph singing softly in his own language, a lullaby, perhaps, that he once sang to his children. The melody was haunting and beautiful, speaking of loss and love and the endurance of the human spirit. For the first time since Samuel's death, Margaret Sullivan didn't feel alone. The storm raged for 3 more days, trapping them in their stone sanctuary. By the 2nd day, Margaret had grown comfortable enough to move about the cave, helping Joseph with simple tasks, sorting herbs, mending a torn parfleche with the bone needle and sinew he provided, learning to make the flatbread he cooked on hot stones by the fire. You work like a Apache woman, he observed on the 3rd morning, watching her grind mesquite pods with practiced motions. Most white women want to be served. I've never been one for idleness, Margaret replied, wiping sweat from her brow despite the cold that seeped in around the buffalo hide door. In Boston, they called me peculiar for insisting on teaching even after I married. Samuel understood. Bless him. He said God gave me a mind, so it would be a sin not to use it. Joseph smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his stern features. Your Samuel was wise man. My Ayanna also had strong mind. She speak 3 languages, keep accounts for trading post better than white man clerk. They worked in companionable silence for a while, the domestic rhythm strangely soothing. Margaret found herself stealing glances at Joseph as he repaired a bridle with patient, skilled hands. There was something deeply attractive about his quiet competence, the way he moved through the world with such self-assurance. She blushed at the thought, a woman of her age entertaining such notions. You are warm? Joseph asked, misinterpreting her flushed cheeks. Fever can come after freezing. No, I'm well. She focused intently on her grinding. just the heat from the fire. That evening, as they shared their simple meal, Joseph surprised her by asking about her life in Boston. She found herself telling him things she'd never spoken aloud. Her marriage to Samuel at 18, the babies lost before their time, the way society expected her to fade quietly into widowhood. "They wanted me to live with my sister," she said, staring into the fire, "to help raise her children and be grateful for the charity. When I said I was going west to teach, they acted as if I'd announced my intention to join a circus." "You brave to come alone," Joseph said. "Many white men not brave enough for such journey." "Or foolish," Margaret countered. "Look where it led me." "Led you to life," he corrected gently. "Sometimes must lose everything to find what matters." Their eyes met across the fire, and something shifted in the air between them. Margaret felt her heart quicken in a way it hadn't since Samuel's courtship. It was absurd. She was a proper Boston widow. He was an Apache warrior. They were from different worlds, different races, different everything. And yet, "Tell me about your children," she said quickly, needing to break the tension. "What were they like?" Joseph's face softened with memory. "Mika, oldest daughter. She like you, always asking questions, wanting to know why sky blue, why birds fly. Niley, younger. She quiet but strong. Best rider in camp, though only 12 winters. And Kuruk, my son." His voice caught. 8 winters old. Everything was adventure to him. Even gathering wood became great hunt. "They sound wonderful," Margaret said softly. "You must miss them terribly." "Every day is weight on heart. But tonight," he paused, seeming to struggle with words. "Tonight, first time in many seasons, weight feels lighter. You good medicine, Margaret Sullivan." The way he said her name, careful and deliberate, made her shiver. "Joseph," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He rose abruptly. "I checked storm, maybe clearing soon." But when he returned, shaking snow from his hair, his expression was troubled. "Still bad, but tracks outside. Horse tracks, many, going toward Pine Ridge." "The bandits?" "Maybe, or soldiers, or both." He secured the door covering carefully. "We safe here, tracks covered by snow. No one knows this place, but when we leave, must be careful." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She lay on her bed of furs, acutely aware of Joseph's presence just a few feet away. In Boston, such an arrangement would be scandalous beyond words. But here, in this cave that existed outside society's rules, it felt natural, even right. She must have dozed, because she woke to find the fire burning low and Joseph sitting up, his posture tense. "What is it?" she whispered. "You cry out in sleep, bad dreams." Margaret sat up, embarrassed. "I'm sorry if I woke you." "No sorry needed." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the concern in his dark eyes. "What haunts your sleep?" "The cold," she admitted. "I dream I'm back in the snow, freezing, alone, and sometimes—" She hesitated, then forged ahead. "Sometimes I dream about the bandits." "What might have happened if you hadn't found me?" "You safe now," Joseph said firmly. "I give you my word. No harm comes to you while you under my protection." "Your word means something," Margaret said. "I can tell. You're an honorable man. Joseph, I want you to know that I see that, regardless of what others might think." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, so gently she might have imagined it, he reached out and touched her hand where it rested on the furs. "You first white person to say such thing to me since my family died?" Margaret turned her hand palm up, letting their fingers intertwine. His hand was calloused from years of work, warm and steady. "Then they're fools," she said. "All of them." What happened next seemed inevitable as the sunrise. Joseph leaned toward her, and Margaret met him halfway. Their lips touched. A gentle, tentative kiss that held years of loneliness and loss, but also the first stirring of something new. When they parted, Margaret's heart was racing like a schoolgirl's. "I should not," Joseph said, though he didn't release her hand. "You white woman, respectable." "I'm a woman," Margaret interrupted. "Just a woman. And you're a man. Everything else, the rules, the expectations, the divisions, they're out there in the storm. In here, we're just two people who found each other against all odds." Joseph studied her face in the dim firelight. "You sure? Your people will—" "My people left me to die in the snow," Margaret said firmly. "You saved me. You've shown me more kindness and respect in 3 days than I've known in 3 years. If that's not enough for them, then perhaps they're not my people after all." This time when he kissed her, there was nothing tentative about it. Margaret felt awakened, as if she'd been sleeping since Samuel's death and was only now returning to life. When Joseph pulled her against him, she went willingly, marveling at how right it felt to be in his arms. They talked through the night, sharing stories and gentle touches. Joseph told her about Apache courtship customs, making her laugh with tales of young men's elaborate attempts to impress their chosen women. Margaret shared her own courtship with Samuel, the secret notes passed in church, the chaperoned walks that felt like freedom. "He was good man to make you happy," Joseph said without jealousy. "I see it in how you speak of him." "He was, and Ayanna was a good woman to make you happy. We're lucky to have known such love." "Maybe lucky to know again," Joseph suggested softly. As dawn light began to filter into the cave, they finally slept, curled together like two halves of a whole. Margaret's last conscious thought was wonder at how natural it felt, how right. She had come west seeking a new life, but she'd never imagined it might include this unexpected connection with a man who should have been her enemy, but had become so much more. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to break, but inside the cave, warmed by more than just the fire now, two wounded hearts had found in each other the possibility of healing. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing about their situation was easy, but for the first time in years, both Margaret and Joseph had something they'd thought lost forever: hope. The new day would bring challenges. They would have to leave the cave, face the world with all its prejudices and dangers. But for now, in these stolen hours between night and dawn, they had each other. And that, Margaret thought as she drifted off to sleep in Joseph's arms, was miracle enough. The morning sun revealed a world transformed. Where once there had been only howling white, now stretched a landscape of pristine snow beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Joseph stood at the cave entrance, his breath forming clouds in the crisp air. "Storm is finished," he announced, turning back to where Margaret was folding the borrowed doeskin dress. She had reluctantly changed back into her own clothes, the chemise and petticoat dried and mended as best as Joseph could manage. Over these, she wore a wool shirt and leather leggings he'd provided, topped with a smaller fur cloak. "You look like half Apache, half Boston lady," Joseph said with a rare smile. "Maybe people not know what to think." Margaret touched the beaded edge of the cloak self-consciously. "I suspect they'll think plenty, none of it charitable." She moved to stand beside him, looking out at the glittering expanse. "It's beautiful, deadly but beautiful. Like many things in life." Joseph agreed. He pointed to the horizon. "Pine Ridge that way. 2 days walking in good weather. Today we make maybe 10 miles. Camp tonight, reach town tomorrow afternoon." "And then?" Margaret asked, not quite meeting his eyes. Joseph was quiet for a moment. "Then you become teacher. Have new life you came to find." "Yes," she said softly. "Of course." They set out after a simple breakfast, Joseph leading the way with the sure-footed confidence of one who had walked these paths countless times. He'd fashioned snowshoes from branches and sinew, showing Margaret how to walk in them without tangling her feet. She felt clumsy at first, like a newborn colt, but soon found a rhythm. The day was bright but bitterly cold. They stopped frequently for Margaret to rest, Joseph always finding sheltered spots out of the wind. During one such break, as they shared water from his gourd, Margaret asked, "Will you stay in Pine Ridge after you've brought me there?" "No. Town holds nothing for me but trade goods and suspicious eyes." He scanned the horizon constantly, even while talking. "I go back to cave. Is my home now?" "It doesn't have to be," Margaret said impulsively. There must be work. The school might need—" "Margaret." His voice was gentle but firm. "What happens in cave stays in cave. Out here, we are Apache and white woman. Oil and water would only bring you trouble." Before she could respond, Joseph suddenly tensed. "Down!" he commanded, pulling her behind a cluster of snow-covered boulders. "Riders coming!" Margaret heard them then, horses struggling through the drifts, men's voices carrying on the still air. Joseph peered around the boulder, then ducked back quickly. "How many?" Margaret whispered. 6, maybe 7. His jaw was tight. "Some wear badges. Posse, looking for someone." They crouched in silence as the riders drew closer. Margaret could make out words now. "Told you they'd head for Pine Ridge. Where else would a woman go? If she's even alive, that storm was a killer. She's alive, all right. And that Apache buck who took her, he's gonna hang for it." Margaret's blood turned cold. They were looking for her, and somehow they'd decided Joseph had kidnapped her. She started to rise, to call out and correct them, but Joseph's hand on her arm stopped her. "No," he breathed. "Listen." Another voice, younger. "Dutch says we find her first. Make sure she can't identify nobody. Then let the law find her body. Blame it on the Indian. 2 birds, 1 stone." "Seems a waste, pretty woman like that, even if she is past her prime." Harsh laughter. "Dutch's orders. No witnesses. Sides, after 3 days with that savage, ain't no white man would want her anyway." The voices faded as the riders continued on. Joseph and Margaret remained frozen until they were long gone. When Joseph finally stood, his face was grim. "They hunting us both," he said. "Bandits and law together. Someone told them I found you." But how could they know? Joseph shrugged. "Maybe tracks before storm covered them. Maybe someone saw me carrying you. Doesn't matter. What matters is they want you dead and me blamed for it." "We have to tell the truth," Margaret insisted. "I'll explain everything. You think they listen? White woman's word about Apache man saving her, against word of white men saying he took her." Joseph shook his head. "I've seen this before. Truth doesn't matter when they want someone to blame." They traveled more carefully after that, Joseph choosing paths that kept them hidden while still moving toward Pine Ridge. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the snow orange and pink, they reached a sheltered grove of pines. "We camp here," Joseph decided. "Good shelter. Can see anyone coming." He built a small fire, careful to use dry wood that would produce little smoke. As darkness fell, they sat close together, sharing warmth and a meal of dried meat and the last of the mesquite cakes. "I won't let them hurt you," Margaret said suddenly. "When we reach town, I'll make them understand. You saved my life. You're a good man. I'll make them see that." Joseph looked at her with something like pity. "You still believe in justice. Is beautiful thing, but naive. Justice different colors for different people." "Then I'll leave with you." Margaret declared, "We'll go somewhere else. Somewhere they won't find us." "Where? Every town same. Apache man and white woman together. Nowhere is safe for such thing." He touched her face gently. "You have good life waiting. School. Children to teach. Respect. Don't throw away for man like me." "A man like you?" Margaret's voice rose. "You mean an honorable man? A kind man? A man who risked his own safety to save a stranger?" "I mean Apache man with dead family and no place in world." Joseph said harshly, "Man who lives in cave like animal. Man whose touch ruins white woman's reputation forever." Margaret grabbed his hand, holding it tight when he tried to pull away. "Your touch saved my life. Your kindness gave me hope again. If that ruins me in their eyes, then their opinion isn't worth having." "You say that now. In dark, with me, but in daylight. In town, with all eyes watching, judging." "Then I'll say it louder," Margaret interrupted. "Joseph, Kichio Hanzi, Brave Eagle, whatever name you choose. You're the best man I've known since my Samuel died. Don't you dare reduce yourself to what small-minded people think." Joseph stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "You dangerous woman, Margaret Sullivan, make me believe impossible things." They held each other as the fire burned low, neither wanting to voice what they both knew, that tomorrow would bring choices neither was ready to make. The town waited like a test, ready to measure their connection against the harsh realities of a world that had no place for what was growing between them. "Whatever happens," Margaret whispered against his chest, "I want you to know that these days with you, they've changed me, awakened something I thought died with Samuel. I'm grateful for that, no matter what comes next." Joseph tightened his arms around her. "You change me too. Make me remember what it is to hope, is dangerous gift, but beautiful one." They slept fitfully, taking turns keeping watch. Margaret dozed against Joseph's shoulder, dreaming of a world where a Boston widow and an Apache warrior could walk together in daylight without fear. It was a foolish dream, she knew, but on this last night before reality intruded, she allowed herself to believe in it. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the knowledge that Pine Ridge lay just hours ahead. As they prepared to leave their simple camp, Joseph caught Margaret's hand. "When we reach town edge," he said carefully, "might be better if you walk in alone. Say you found shelter, survived storm. Leave me out of story." "No," Margaret said firmly. "I won't lie about you. I won't pretend you didn't save me." "Then they hang me for kidnapping. Assault, you know this." "Not if I—" She stopped, struck by a sudden thought. "Joseph, what if we didn't go to Pine Ridge? What if we went somewhere else entirely?" "Where would we go?" "I don't know. Mexico, California? Somewhere we could start fresh, where no one knows us?" Joseph cupped her face in his hands. "You talk like woman in love, but love not enough against whole world. How do you know unless we try?" Tears stung her eyes. "I've been sensible my whole life, proper, respectable. And where did it lead? To nearly dying alone in a snowstorm? Maybe it's time to be foolish." Joseph kissed her gently, tasting the salt of her tears. "We go to Pine Ridge, see what waits there. Then decide, maybe you're right, maybe time for foolish hope. But first, we see what we face." They set out for the final leg of their journey, hands clasped despite the danger, despite the impossibility of it all. Ahead, Pine Ridge waited with all its judgments and dangers, but for now, for these last precious hours, they walked together, a proper Boston widow and an Apache warrior, proof that sometimes the most unlikely connections were the strongest of all. Pine Ridge appeared before them like a wound on the pristine landscape, a collection of wooden buildings huddled against the wilderness, smoke rising from chimneys into the cold afternoon air. Joseph stopped at a rise overlooking the town, his expression unreadable. "Last chance," he said quietly. "You walk in alone, tell story of finding shelter, I disappear." Margaret squeezed his hand. "We go together, or not at all." They descended toward the main street, and almost immediately, heads began to turn. A woman sweeping her porch froze mid-motion. A man loading supplies onto a wagon reached slowly for the rifle propped against the wheel. By the time they reached the center of town, a crowd had gathered. "That's her!" a voice called out. Margaret recognized Jake Hutchins, the whiskey drummer from the stagecoach, his head bandaged but his eyes sharp with malice. "That's the woman from the coach, and that's the savage who took her!" The crowd stirred like a disturbed nest of wasps. Margaret stepped forward, keeping her voice steady. "Mr. Hutchins is mistaken. This man saved my life. If not for him, I would have died in the storm." "After he and his gang robbed us," Jake insisted. "Playing hero with his own victim. I seen it before." A man pushed through the crowd. Tall, well-dressed, with silver hair and cold gray eyes. "I'm Thomas Whitmore, mayor of Pine Ridge. Ma'am, are you hurt? Has this man harmed you in any way?" "On the contrary, Mr. Whitmore. He found me near death in the storm, took me to shelter, and cared for me with nothing but respect and kindness." Whitmore's eyes flicked between her and Joseph, taking in their clasped hands with obvious disgust. "I see. And during these 3 days of care, you were alone with him?" The implications hung heavy in the air. Margaret lifted her chin. "Yes, and I'm alive because of it." "Ruined is what you are." A woman spat from the crowd. "No decent woman." "That's enough." A new voice cut through the muttering. Sheriff Ben Carter, a weathered man in his 50s, stepped forward, his badge glinting in the sun. "Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions, and you," he looked at Joseph, "don't move."
"Sheriff, this is ridiculous,"
Margaret began, but Carter held up a hand. "Dutch Garrett and his boys rode in this morning. Said they found the stagecoach, driver dead, passengers robbed. Said they tracked the Apache who did it but lost him in the storm." His eyes were shrewd. "Funny thing is, Dutch seemed mighty sure it was Apache work, even though Jake here was unconscious and couldn't say what happened." Margaret felt Joseph tense beside her. "Sheriff, I can tell you exactly what happened. Dutch Garrett and his men robbed that stage. They killed the driver and that poor sheriff. They stole everything and left me to die in the storm. If Joseph hadn't found me—" "Lies?" Jake burst out. "She's been addled by her ordeal, or maybe the savage threatened her." What happened next was so fast Margaret almost missed it. Jake reached into his coat, and a folded paper fell to the muddy ground. Joseph moved like lightning, scooping it up before Jake could react. He handed it to the sheriff without looking at it. Carter unfolded the paper, his expression darkening as he read. "Well, now, this is interesting. It's a letter from you, Jake, to Dutch Garrett, talking about the Boston widow with the fat purse on yesterday's stage." Jake's face went white. That ain't mine." "Has your signature on it." Carter looked around the crowd. "Seems to me we've been looking at the wrong suspects." Whitmore stepped forward quickly. "Now, Ben, let's not be hasty. A piece of paper doesn't proves enough to ask some questions." Carter interrupted, starting with why Dutch was so quick to blame this on Apaches, and why Mr. Hutchins here is so eager to point fingers when he was supposedly unconscious during the robbery. The crowd was murmuring now, uncertainty replacing hostility. But Whitmore wasn't finished. "Even if the robbery story is true, Sheriff, it doesn't change the impropriety. This woman spent 3 days alone with this Indian. She's ruined for any respectable position. The school board will never—" "I'll take my chances with the school board," Margaret said firmly. "My conscience is clear." "Your conscience?" Whitmore's voice rose. "What about the example you'd set for our children? A woman who consorts with savages?" Joseph spoke for the first time, his voice deep and controlled. "This savage has name, Joseph, given by your own priests. This savage served as scout for army, fought your enemies. This savage lost family to your soldiers' bullets. Yet still I save white woman's life. Who is savage here?" "You dare—" Whitmore started forward, but Carter blocked him. "That's enough. Everyone calm down." The sheriff looked tired. "Ma'am, I believe your story, but Whitmore's right about one thing. This town isn't going to accept whatever this is between you two. Maybe it's best if—" He was interrupted by the thunder of hooves. Dutch Garrett and 5 riders burst into town, pulling up short when they saw the crowd. Dutch's eyes, those same cold blue eyes Margaret remembered, widened when he saw her. "Well," he said, recovering quickly, "looks like you found our missing woman, Sheriff, and the Apache who took her. Good work." "Funny thing, Dutch," Carter said slowly. "She tells a different story. Says you and your boys robbed that stage." Dutch laughed. "The word of a woman who's been alone with a savage for 3 days? Come on, Ben. You know what happens to women's minds when Indians get hold of them." "Nothing happened to my mind," Margaret said clearly. "I remember everything. Your mask slipped when you were robbing me. Mr. Garrett, I saw your face clearly. Blue eyes, scar through your left eyebrow. The one you probably got in Tucson last year. There was talk of it even in Boston." Dutch's hand moved toward his gun, but found Carter's pistol already aimed at his chest. "I wouldn't," the sheriff said mildly. "Jake here already gave us some interesting reading material. Letter with your name all over it."
"Jake, you idiot!"
Dutch snarled. "They made me," Jake babbled. "Threatened to kill me if I didn't help." The situation exploded. Dutch went for his gun, his men following suit. Joseph shoved Margaret behind a water trough as bullets started flying. The crowd scattered, screaming. Carter and his deputies returned fire, but they were outnumbered. Joseph had produced a knife from somewhere, moving with deadly grace despite having no firearm. Margaret saw him take down one of Dutch's men who'd gotten too close, but there were too many, and Dutch himself was bearing down on their position. "Got to shut the woman up," Dutch growled, leveling his pistol at Margaret. Joseph rose to shield her, and Margaret saw it all happen in horrible slow motion, Dutch's finger tightening on the trigger, Joseph stepping fully in front of her, the gun's report echoing off the buildings. Joseph staggered, blood blooming across his shirt, but he didn't fall. Instead, with a warrior's cry that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself, he threw his knife. It caught Dutch in the shoulder, spinning him around. More gunfire, shouts, then sudden silence as the last of Dutch's men threw down their weapons. Joseph sank to his knees, Margaret catching him, cradling his head in her lap. "No," she whispered, pressing her hands against the wound in his side. "No, you stay with me. You hear me? Brave Eagle, you stay with me." Joseph's eyes found hers, a slight smile touching his lips. "Told you, oil and water." "Hush, save your strength." She looked up desperately. "Someone help him, please." The crowd stood frozen, watching. Then Whitmore stepped forward, his face hard. "Let him die. One less Indian to worry about." Something snapped in Margaret. She rose, Joseph's blood on her hands, and faced the mayor. "You want to let him die? Fine. But know this, I'll tell everyone who'll listen what really happened here. How this town's mayor stood by while an innocent man bled out. How you probably knew about Dutch's activities all along. Oh yes, Mr. Whitmore. I saw how quick you were to defend him. How eager to silence me. What was your cut, I wonder?" Whitmore's face went purple. "You can't prove anything." "Maybe not, but I can make sure everyone from here to San Francisco hears about it. I may be a ruined woman in your eyes, but I'm still a teacher. I can write, and I will." Carter stepped forward. "Doc Miller, get over here and tend to this man, now!" The doctor, an elderly man with kind eyes, pushed through the crowd. As he knelt beside Joseph, he muttered, "Saved my grandson from drowning 2 summers back. Least I can do." While the doctor worked, Carter faced Whitmore. "Tom, I think you and I need to have a long talk about your relationship with Dutch Garrett. And ma'am," he turned to Margaret, "you'll need to give a full statement. But after that," he glanced at Joseph, who was being carried to the doctor's office. "After that, might be best if you both moved on. This town's got a short memory for heroics, but a long one for scandal." Margaret didn't care. All that mattered was the man being carried away. The man who'd stepped between her and death twice now. She hurried after them, ignoring the stares and whispers of the crowd. As she reached the doctor's office, she heard Whitmore's voice behind her. low and venomous. "This isn't over. You've made an enemy today, woman." She turned, meeting his gaze steadily. "Get in line, Mr. Whitmore. After what I've survived, you don't frighten me at all." Then she was through the door, back at Joseph's side, holding his hand as the doctor worked to save his life. The battle for Pine Ridge was won, but Margaret knew the war for their future had just begun. The wagon jolted over another rut, but Joseph barely winced. 3 weeks had passed since the shooting, and though he still moved carefully, the strength was returning to his body. Margaret held the reins, having learned to handle the team during their slow journey south. "There," Joseph pointed to a break in the canyon walls. "Through there." Margaret guided the wagon through the narrow passage, and suddenly the world opened up before them. A hidden valley stretched out, green despite the season, with a clear stream winding through cottonwoods and willows. Smoke rose from several chimneys, and she could see people moving between modest buildings, a mixture of adobe houses and traditional wickiups. "What is this place?" she breathed. "Sanctuary," Joseph replied. "Started by old Padre who believed God loves all people equal. Now run by his students, Apache, Mexican, white people who don't fit anywhere else. All welcome here." As they descended into the valley, people emerged to greet them. Margaret saw Apache women working alongside Mexican farmers, white children playing with Indian children, all the rigid boundaries of the outside world seemingly dissolved. A woman approached their wagon, elderly, dignified, with steel-gray hair braided in the Apache style, but wearing a simple American dress. "Joseph," she called in accented English. "We heard you were dead." Almost was. "Maria, this is Margaret. She comes with me." Maria's knowing eyes took in their clasped hands, the protective way Joseph positioned himself despite his injury. "Welcome, child. Any friend of Joseph's has a home here." They were given a small adobe house on the edge of the settlement, 2 rooms with a fireplace and a view of the mountains. As Margaret helped Joseph inside, he caught her hand. "Is not Boston," he said quietly, "is not what you dreamed when you came west." "No," Margaret agreed, looking around the simple space. "It's better. It's ours." That evening, Maria invited them to dinner, where Margaret learned the valley's story. Father Miguel had established it 20 years ago as a refuge for anyone fleeing persecution. When he died, the community continued his work, surviving through farming, hunting, and trading with sympathetic merchants. "We have no school," Maria mentioned, watching Margaret's reaction. "The children learn what they can from whoever knows letters. But a real teacher—" "I'd be honored," Margaret said immediately. "Though I'll need supplies, books, slates, chalk." "I know traders," Joseph said. "Can get what you need." Within a month, Margaret had established her school in the largest building in the settlement. Her students ranged from 6 to 16, speaking a mixture of English, Spanish, and Apache. She taught them all, moving between languages with help from Joseph and others, adapting her Boston methods to frontier needs. The children adored her. They called her Teacher Margaret or Señora Maestra, and competed to bring her wildflowers and help clean the schoolroom. For the first time since Samuel's death, Margaret felt truly useful again. Joseph, meanwhile, found his own place in the community. His knowledge of medicinal plants made him valuable as a healer's assistant, and his diplomatic skills helped resolve disputes between the various groups in the valley. People began seeking his counsel, calling him by his Apache name with respect. Their wedding came in spring, when the valley bloomed with desert flowers. They were married twice, once in the Apache way, with Joseph's cousins from a nearby reservation officiating, and once by a traveling priest who asked no questions about their different races. Margaret wore the doeskin dress that had saved her life, now decorated with beadwork she'd done herself under Maria's teaching. Joseph wore traditional Apache clothing, looking like the warrior he'd always been. The entire valley attended, celebrating the union that the outside world would have condemned. You know what you lose? Marrying me? Joseph asked her the night before the ceremony. No place in white society, no going back to Boston, always looking over shoulder for men like Whitmore. I know what I gain, Margaret countered. A life with meaning, a man I love, a community that judges people by their hearts, not their skin. That's worth more than all the tea parties in Boston. Their life together wasn't without challenges. Sometimes traders would refuse to deal with Joseph, or make crude comments about Margaret. Once, a group of soldiers came through, searching for Apache renegades, and the entire community held its breath until they passed. But there were more joys than sorrows. Margaret watched her students bloom, saw young Apache girls writing their first words with the same pride she'd once seen in her Boston pupils. She helped Maria establish a small library, trading eggs and vegetables for books from sympathetic merchants. Joseph taught her the old ways, how to read the weather in cloud formations, which plants could heal and which could harm, the stories his grandmother had told about when the world was young. In return, she read to him in the evenings, sharing the poetry and literature that had sustained her through lonely years. One afternoon, as Margaret dismissed her students, she found Joseph waiting outside with a strange expression on his face. "What is it?" she asked, immediately concerned. He handed her a letter, worn from travel. "From Pine Ridge, Sheriff Carter." Margaret read quickly, her expression darkening. Thomas Whitmore had been arrested for his connection to Dutch Garrett's gang, but had escaped custody. There were rumors he was heading south, seeking revenge on those who'd exposed him. "We could leave," Joseph said quietly. "Go deeper into Mexico, disappear completely." Margaret looked around the valley, at her schoolhouse, at children playing in the dusty street, at the mountains that had become her home. Then she looked at her husband, seeing the same resolve in his eyes that she felt in her heart. "No," she said firmly. "This is our home. These are our people. We don't run anymore." Joseph smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "My brave Boston woman, still have spine of granite." "And my Apache warrior," she replied, taking his hand, still standing between me and danger. That night, the community gathered to discuss Whitmore's threat. To Margaret's surprise and deep emotion, person after person stood to declare they would defend their teacher and healer. Apache warriors, Mexican farmers, white settlers who'd found refuge here, all united in protecting their own. "This valley has given us home when world said we deserve none," declared an old Apache woman. "We fight for it, fight for each other." As Margaret lay in Joseph's arms that night, she thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. She'd left Boston seeking a simple teaching position, a quiet life of respectability and routine. Instead, she'd found love with an enemy, a community of outcasts who'd become family, and a purpose greater than anything she'd imagined. "Do you ever regret?" Joseph asked in the darkness, seeming to read her thoughts. "The life you could have had?" "The only thing I regret," Margaret said, turning to kiss him, "is that we didn't find each other sooner, though perhaps we had to lose everything first to be ready for what we've built." Outside, a coyote called to the moon, and the desert wind sang through the canyon walls. Inside their simple home, two people who should never have met, who should never have loved, held each other close and dreamed of the future they were creating. One student, one patient, one day at a time. The challenge of Whitmore still loomed, but surrounded by their chosen family. Margaret and Joseph faced it without fear. They had already survived the impossible. Whatever came next, they would meet it together, in this valley where love was stronger than law, where hearts mattered more than skin, where two broken people had found wholeness in each other's arms. 10 years had passed since that terrible storm, and Margaret stood in the doorway of her schoolhouse, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson. Her hair, once carefully pinned in Boston fashion, now hung in a long braid threaded with silver. adorned with the beaded leather tie Joseph had made for their 5th anniversary. "Señora Maestra," young Pablo Morales ran up, clutching his primer. "Look, I wrote my whole name." Margaret examined his careful letters with the same joy she'd felt watching her first Boston pupils master their alphabets. "Excellent work, Pablo. Your grandmother will be so proud." As the boy scampered off, she felt familiar arms encircle her waist. Joseph rested his chin on her shoulder, and she leaned back into his warmth. 32 students now," he said. "School getting too small." "The community's growing," Margaret agreed. "Did you hear? The Hendersons are expecting again, and 2 new families arrived from Texas last week." "Refuge becoming town," Joseph observed. "Good thing, maybe, or maybe dangerous thing." Margaret understood his concern. As their valley sanctuary grew, it became harder to remain hidden from the outside world. But she'd learned to take each day as it came, to find joy in the present rather than fear the future. They walked home together, hand in hand, nodding to neighbors who called out greetings. The suspicious looks of their early days had long since transformed into respect and affection. Margaret had delivered babies, taught children, nursed the sick through fever. Joseph had set broken bones, mediated disputes, and led hunting parties that kept the community fed through hard winters. Their small adobe house had grown too, with a room added for Joseph's healing work and another for Margaret's ever-expanding collection of books. But the item that drew her eye every evening hung by the door, the great bear cloak that had saved her life, now carefully preserved and displayed. "Remember?" Joseph asked, following her gaze. "Every day." Margaret replied, "How could I forget? A proper Boston widow, freezing to death in her undergarments, saved by an Apache warrior with a bear cloak and a heart bigger than these mountains." Joseph chuckled, the sound still rare enough to make her treasure it. "Not how I saw it. Lost man already dead inside, brought back to life by stubborn woman who wouldn't give up." They prepared their evening meal together, a comfortable routine developed over years. As they ate, Joseph told her about his day, a successful birth where his knowledge of herbs had helped a difficult delivery. A young Apache man he was training in the healing arts. "Samuel Crow Feathers shows real gift," Joseph said. "Reminds me of my son, how quick he learns." Margaret reached across the table to squeeze his hand. The pain of lost children never fully left either of them, but they'd learned to speak of their families with love rather than only grief. After dinner, they sat on their small porch, watching stars emerge in the clear desert sky. It was then they saw the riders approaching, a small group moving slowly up the valley path. Joseph tensed, but Margaret recognized the lead rider. "It's Sheriff Carter," she said, surprised. They hadn't heard from Pine Ridge in over 2 years. Carter dismounted stiffly, older now, his badge still glinting in the moonlight. He removed his hat as he approached. Ma'am, Joseph. Hope I'm not intruding." "You're welcome here, Sheriff," Margaret said carefully. "Though I'm curious what brings you so far south." Carter smiled. "Partly to bring news. Tom Whitmore's dead. Tried to rob a bank in Tucson. Got himself shot by a guard. Won't be troubling anyone anymore." Margaret felt a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying lift from her shoulders. Joseph's hand found hers in the darkness. "And the other part?" Joseph asked. Carter shifted uncomfortably. "Well, that's more complicated. See, Pine Ridge has grown considerably. We've got near 300 students now, and only 2 teachers. School board's desperate. They sent me to find you, Mrs. Sullivan. Offer you a position. Full salary, house provided, complete respectability." "After everything that happened?" Margaret couldn't hide her amazement. "People forget, especially when they need something. Board's willing to overlook your unconventional marriage, long as you come alone and keep quiet about it." The silence stretched out, filled with cricket songs and distant coyote calls. "Finally," Margaret laughed, not bitterly, but with genuine mirth. "Sheriff Carter, do you know what today is?" He shook his head, confused. "It's the day Pablo Morales wrote his whole name for the first time. Yesterday, I helped deliver the changing woman's granddaughter while teaching her daughter to read. Tomorrow, I'll show the older students how to write business letters so they can trade fairly with merchants." She stood, Joseph rising with her. "I have 32 students who call me Señora Maestra, a husband who values me as a partner, and a community that judges me by my actions, not my choices. Why would I trade that for respectability in a town that would only tolerate me if I denied the best part of my life?" Carter nodded slowly. "Figured you'd say something like that. Had to ask, though." He put his hat back on. "For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice, both of you. What you've built here, it's something special." After Carter left, promising to stay the night with Maria's family, Margaret and Joseph returned to their porch. The night was warm, filled with the scent of desert flowers and the sound of guitars from the Mexican Quarter. "Any regrets?" Joseph asked, echoing his question from years before. Margaret considered the question seriously. In Boston, she would have been a respectable widow, perhaps remarried to some widower who needed a mother for his children. She would have had servants, social position, comfort. Instead, she had calloused hands from helping build homes, skin brown from the desert sun, and clothes patched from hard use. She had students who spoke 3 languages and neighbors who'd fled a dozen different persecutions. She had a husband whose touch still made her heart race, whose quiet strength anchored her days. "Yes," she said finally. Joseph looked at her in surprise. "I regret every day I lived by other people's rules instead of my heart's truth. I regret the years I spent being small when I could have been brave." She turned to face him fully. "But mostly, I regret that we can't live long enough to love each other for centuries." Joseph pulled her close, and they stood together watching the stars wheel overhead. From the valley came the sound of laughter, children playing, lives being lived without regard for the world's harsh divisions. "Look," Joseph said suddenly, pointing to the eastern sky. A meteor blazed across the darkness, brilliant and brief. "Elders say shooting star means warrior's spirit going home, or maybe teacher's spirit finding where it belongs." "We're already home," Margaret said softly. "Both of us." And it was true. The storm that had nearly killed her had instead delivered her to exactly where she needed to be. Not the life she'd planned, but the life she was meant to live. In losing everything, she'd found what mattered most: love that transcended boundaries, purpose that went beyond propriety, and the courage to build something beautiful in a hard land. The bear cloak hung by their door, witness to the journey from that frozen night to this warm evening. It would hang there for decades more, as their valley grew and changed, as former students became teachers themselves, as the world slowly, painfully, learned lessons that Margaret and Joseph had discovered in a cave during a killing storm, that love was stronger than law, that kindness crossed all boundaries, and that sometimes the most unlikely paths led to exactly where you belonged. As they went inside, Joseph began humming the Apache lullaby he'd sung that first night. Margaret joined him, her voice blending with his as they prepared for bed. Outside, the desert bloomed in darkness, tough and beautiful and enduring, like the love that had grown between a Boston widow and an Apache warrior who'd found each other at the edge of death and chosen, against all odds, to live.